We do have a lot of questions coming in, so we'll get to as many as we can. Um, First question we have is, you didn't mention industrial exemptions such as oil and gas or mining. Aren't those activities exempt from licensing?
No, there are no industrial exemptions for geology in California. Um, a lot of people seem to misunderstand the definition of the practice of geology. There is a statement in the practice of geology that says in-house work. In other words, geologic work that does not leave the business entity or company doesn't require a license. And for oil and gas and mining, that is typically exploration. So, for example, if Chevron is doing geologic work that will be used internal to Chevron to evaluate whether or not they're going to pursue drilling at a particular location to recover oil or gas, that work it doesn't require a license. However, once that same data is used to submit a permit to a public government agency to drill that well, that does require a license because that is public practice of geology. Yeah, a lot of people seem to have that misperception that mining or oil and gas are exempt, and they are not. It is only their work that doesn't leave their company that is exempt.
Great, thanks for the clarification on that. We have another question here. I worked under a licensed geologist in Washington State. Would I be able to use her as a reference on my California PG application?
Yes, for the work that person oversaw in Washington State under their Washington State license, you can claim that work experience, and that person can be a reference for that work.
Great. Here's some other ones about references. I've heard that I can't use an engineer as a reference anymore. Who can be a reference for my PG application if that's the case?
This goes back to that whole question about the exemption for PEs under the Geologist Act. And basically, you can still use a PE as a reference. However, in the new regulation that's coming out, the board has made it clear for people that a PE can be a reference if they are practicing geology legally under the limited exemption and can document that they are competent to do so under their civil engineering license.
Okay. I'm a recently licensed person. Can you explain a little bit more about what responsible charge means? I know you covered that, but maybe talk about it a little more. Is there anything else that attendees should be aware of?
Yeah, a lot of people seem to think that just signing and sealing a document means you're in responsible charge. And signing and sealing a document is an indication of responsible charge. You have to be aware of exactly what's going on with the work and have been involved in making the technical decisions. Or if you're taking over work for somebody else, you have to acknowledge that, that work was done in a manner that you feel is appropriate, and that from this point forward, you don't think you can rely on that data. You are basically saying, when you take responsible charge of somebody else's work, that you can rely on that data because you've evaluated it and you are comfortable using that data under your license. A lot of times, one of the most common violations we get is what I call the rent-a-stamp violations, where somebody will pay somebody $500 or $1,000 to review and sign a report. And that's not exercising appropriate responsible charge. That's basically called aiding and abetting unlicensed practice. And that's the violation that you'll be charged with in that situation if you haven't been involved in making the decisions associated with that work. Because a lot of people, again, seem to think that responsible charge means just signing and sealing the final report.
Great. In terms of signing and sealing, are electronic signatures and seals allowed, or does it all have to be hand signed?
Electronic signatures and seals are allowed. there's not a lot of specific guidance on that because the technology changes so quickly. But I would suggest that anybody who has questions about signing and sealing look at section 3008 of the regulations, because it does talk about electronic signatures. It talks about the types of seals that are allowed. It talks about what happens if 2 or more people are sharing responsible charge of a project, and how do they note that when they sign and seal a document, that type of thing. So it's actually, in my opinion, one of the most useful sections of the regulations.
Great. Again, along the lines of signing and sealing, are there specific scenarios where a person would have to sign and seal something, or where are the guidelines found for that?
Basically, any geologic work that you do has to be signed and sealed. So, for example, we get a lot of questions from regulatory agencies who want to transmit their comments via email. There's a couple ways that they have come up with to do that. They can type their geologic comments or decisions in an email and then electronically sign and seal that email. Or they can put them in a comment memo, physically sign and seal it, scan it, attach it to the email. But basically, anytime you're making a geologic decision or judgment and documenting it, that's a geologic document.
Okay. How do I get my license back if I don't pay my license fees, or if I become delinquent, or if it's canceled for non-payment?
There's a certain time period, and I believe it's 5 years. I'd have to look at that up to be sure, where your license is considered delinquent if you haven't paid your fees. And in order to get your license back within that time period, you have to pay the back fees and penalties. So just recently I had a question from a guy who had his license had been delinquent for 4.5 years, I believe, and he wanted to just cancel it so that he didn't have to pay the thousands of dollars of back fees and fines. And he cannot do that until that 5-year delinquency period is up and his license is officially canceled. Once you officially lose your license for non-payment of fees, you have to reapply and you have to retake the exams, and you will be issued a new license number. You won't get your old license number back.
Okay, great, thanks for that. We've got a couple questions actually going back to presentation number 1 about licensing. Do I have to take all the license exams at once, or can I do them sequentially?
You can take them in any order, and you can take them 1 at a time, 2 at a time, or all 3 at a time, in any combination that you choose. You just won't be issued your license until we have documentation that you've passed all 3 required exams for the PG.
Okay, and then what happens if I don't pass 1 or more of the exams? Can I appeal my exam results if I don't pass? How do I work through that?
The board no longer allows appeals of exams, mostly because there hadn't been a successful exam in the 5 or 6 years prior to us changing the regulations. The way the exams are developed now using the psychometric-based processes means that it's incredibly unlikely that anybody would ever appeal the exam and succeed in getting a score change. So that process takes up a lot of time and money, and the board went through the formal legal regulation process and got that section of the law changed. However, if you do fail 1 or more of the exams, that's not uncommon. All you have to do is file a re-exam form for the next exam cycle that you want to take the exam in and pay the exam fee only. You don't have to reapply once you've been approved.
Okay, thanks for that. After I've been approved for my GIT or PGP license, how long do I have to take and pass my exams?
In general, when you apply for the license, you're scheduled for the next exam cycle. You're required to provide a timeline saying, I'm going to take the exam here. If you don't take the exams immediately, either you no-show, you don't take the exam that you signed up for, you have 2 exam cycles to take the exams before your application is declared abandoned. So say you sign up for the exams in October of this year, and for some reason you no-show, there's some personal reason why you couldn't go to the exams. You'll get a partial refund of your exam fees, and you can sign up for either the spring of the following year or the fall of the following year to complete your exams. As long as you're in the process, you can fail them as many times as you want, but you only have 2 exam cycles to get the process going, because it's just too difficult for the board to track when people were approved, and when there's some complicated discussion in the regulations about when an application is considered abandoned. So if you're worried about your application being declared abandoned, you should call and talk to me about your specific situation.
Okay, and we've got one other question about the licensing in terms of exams and applications. Can I apply for the PG license and a specialty certification, such as a CHG or CEG, at the same time? Or do I have to get the PG first and then do the specialty?
You can apply for both at the same time as long as you meet all the requirements for both. So that means the additional experience required for the specialty. You do have to provide separate applications, separate application fees, and separate documentation for each license that you're applying for. So don't just fill out one application, check all the boxes, and throw everything in the file. That's not going to work. They are separate applications that you have to fill out.
Okay, and then talking about throwing everything in the file, should I submit my resume, thesis, reports, or published papers with my application? I know you said submit everything at once, but are those included in that?
No, you do not need to submit any of those for your application. You should only submit the information that the board asks for. The only time we may look at additional reports is likely if you're applying for a specialty under the 5-year option for your PG. For your CEG or CHG. So submitting your resume, submitting copies of papers or a thesis, that's not required in the law, and we will not even look at it. So we may throw it in your file just because it's what you submitted, but it will not help your application in any way.
Okay, great. That's good to know. What happens if someone files a complaint against me as a licensee?
If somebody files a complaint against you, you will be contacted by the board and advised of the nature of the complaint and be given an opportunity to respond. In fact, you are required to respond by law. Now, your response may be, thank you very much. I understand there's a complaint against me. Go pound sand, go talk to my lawyer, whatever you want. That is considered a legitimate response, but simply ignoring us is a violation of the law. So once that happens, the board enforcement staff will get whatever information you choose to provide, and then the complaint will be forwarded to an independent board contracted expert who will review the substance of the complaint and the information you provide in your defense. And then the board's executive officer and enforcement manager will decide whether or not to issue a violation. If a violation is issued against you, you do have the opportunity to discuss it with the board before it's finalized through what's called an informal conference, in which you can provide additional information and to the executive officer, and he will make a decision on whether or not to move forward with the violation. At that point, the board issues the violation or doesn't issue the violation. If they do issue the violation and there's a fine, you're required to pay it. You can also appeal for specifics on that process. If you're ever in that situation, the enforcement staff will guide you through that, and that would go through a legal appeal in a court. Once that happens, similar to an application denial, if the judge will make a ruling, and that ruling will get forwarded to the board for adoption or overrule. And that's how the process works.
Okay, thanks for the clarification on that. We have another one here. I have been a CPG, AIPG for many years in another state. What's the first step for getting registered in California?
Well, the CPG AIPG certification is not a license. It's a professional society certification, and it has no legal standing in California. So you would apply just like any other applicant. You would submit an application, pay your fees, provide references documenting your work experience, provide your education, and then you would take the exams, and if you pass them, you would become licensed.
Okay, thank you. And then going back to complaints and violations, can you talk about what are some common examples that you see in terms of violations of conduct and also complaints? I know you touched on some of them earlier, but are there some other ones that you see a lot?
The most common complaints are associated with a lack of communication with the client. Usually, I would say in a great majority of the cases, one of our enforcement staff will get a complaint saying that so-and-so won't call me back. I don't know what the status of my report is, blah, blah, blah. And then when contacted by the board, the licensee will say, oh, well, I just got behind, blah, 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 and then expect that the complaint be withdrawn. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Once a complaint is filed, we have to go through the process of doing the full investigation on the complaint. So the biggest tip I have for people for avoiding a complaint is to call your clients back, because non-responsiveness is generally what causes people to file a complaint with the board. The other one is practicing outside of your license authority. Commonly, that could be a certified engineering geologist not understanding the definition of civil engineering and inadvertently doing civil engineering because they think that they can do engineering because it's in their title, which is incorrect. Another common violation is unlicensed practice, either with people who were never licensed or who think that they fall under some exemption, which they don't, or practicing outside of a license authority. We do get a percentage of negligence and incompetence violations, things, people making up data. That's always a fun one. Or people doing things badly, which is unfortunate. Those are usually the most common ones.
Okay. And then I've got one final one here. Are there scenarios that would require a professional geologist to obtain a PGP geophysics license to do geophysics work on a project?
Yes, there are. In general, geologists can do geophysics related to their practice of geology. So, for example, when I would do a groundwater investigation, I could run borehole geophysics to help me when designing a well. However, I can't offer geophysics. So that's where a lot of some geologists don't understand where that line is. So a typical example is with underground utility locating. Somebody uses a ground penetrating radar to locate something in the subsurface, say underground utilities, underground storage tanks, voids. That work has nothing to do with a geologic project. There's no overall geologic investigation. It's only using that single tool of ground penetrating radar. And in that case, you would have to be a licensed geophysicist to do that. And if you did that as a geologist, you would be in violation of practicing outside of your license.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, that's about all we have time for today. So thank you everyone for all of your excellent questions. And thank you, Lori, for just taking the time to really clarify and answer all the questions that came in today and for your great talks. Really appreciate it. I just want to take a moment and again thank Envirotech for helping to make this webinar possible today. So thank you to our sponsor for today's webinar. If you have any questions that were not addressed today, you can email them to us at goalie@americangeosciences.org, and we'll make sure to go ahead and send your questions along to Lori, or Lori has also provided her contact information in the slide presentation, so you have those references there as well. And thank you again, Lori, for sharing your time, expertise, and insight with us today. We really appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So go ahead. This concludes our webinar for today. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.